Welcome to Mayank Chhaya Reports. My guest is the well known author, diplomat, politician, and the ever compelling articulator of India's great civilizational legacies, Pavan Varma. He is here to discuss his latest book, The Great Hindu Civilization Achievement, Neglect, Bias, and the Way Forward. The book, being formally launched on August 10th in New Delhi, in India, is published by Westland. It takes in its sweep grand themes of the great Hindu civilization and how Hindus need to shake off decades of apathy and indifference towards its varied, profound accomplishments in metaphysics, philosophy, art, creativity, polity, society, science, and economics. Pavan Varma. First, tell me the overarching motivation for you to write a book like this at this time.
Well, I genuinely feel, Mayank, that Hindus are the legatees of a great civilization, notable for its antiquity, its continuity, its peaks of refinement, its diversity, and its assimilation. There were two factors which motivated me. One is that there appears to have been, if not a conspiracy, but a noticeable tendency to downplay, devalue, and sometimes even denigrate this great heritage and legacy by people, some of whom are well intentioned, that to give due credit to Hindu civilization, especially of ancient India, may lead to the undesirable consequence of Hindu glorification and thereby contribute to strengthening the ultra Hindu right in the country. So I say well intentioned because that is their attempt to preserve secularism and also, in a sense, Hinduism itself from its excesses. But my argument is that while that is a separate problem and needs to be tackled, including democratically, to link the two, to hyphenate the two, that because you are afraid of Hindu glorification in the present, you don't give enough cognizance to, recognition to the genuinely, objectively verifiable achievements of Hindu civilization. The second motivation was that I genuinely feel that Hindus themselves display a somewhat unfortunate lack of curiosity about their own heritage and legacy. I think partly that is because Hinduism is a way of life. It has no one prescribed book, no one prescribed pope, not only one temple, no mandatorily applicable ritual. No, so in many ways you are a Hindu and you continue to be one. But somewhere there is a lack of curiosity bordering on indifference to the great treasure house which is at their doorstep, which is what their past brings to them over millennia. So my idea was to dwell on this civilization and trace it from the recesses of its origins in the remote past to the present time, and bring it to a period where we can also assess what are the imperatives today and what needs to be done tomorrow.
This is a perfect segue for me because I was going to ask you. You write about the fact that Hindus themselves show little real curiosity about its great heritage, about the breadth and depth of what that legacy is. That might seem counterintuitive to some because we are living in a time when proclaiming to be Hindu has become a sort of a political kickoff of our times. And yet, like you point out, and I have pointed out to a lot of my friends, that you have no concept of the true greatness of this civilization is. Why do you think that is? Is it pure laziness? Is it willful ignorance? Or it's a combination of a lot of things that Hindus display such lack of curiosity?
Well, partly I explained to you because Hinduism itself is a way of life. Partly I put the blame on our education system. Now, for instance, Hindus may not know, or most of them do not know, what are the three foundational texts of Hinduism: the Upanishads,
Right.
the Brahma Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita. They don't know that there are six highly developed and sophisticated systems of philosophy. They don't know of the remarkably intricate filigree of concepts like the four Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, which which account for a balanced life. They don't know the value and the deep thought that has gone into the four ashrams that Hindus talk about, from brahmacharya to moksha. They are very little aware of the great audacity of thought that has gone into an entire range of fields: philosophy, political science, social thinking, the arts, the remarkable theory of rasa, where aesthetics were born in India for the first time in the world, centuries and millennia before the West believes it was discovered in the 18th or the 17th century. The word aesthetics, the whole theory of rasa, the remarkable exploration of it first in Bharat's Natya Shastra and then by Abhinav Gupta. People don't know.
Right.
People don't know of the remarkable contributions of science. People don't know of the remarkable contributions in linguistics, in theater, in painting, in music, in dance. So I attempted to try and profile them, not fully because it's in the scope of a book, and a book can be written on each of these subjects separately, but to profile that. And I also believe, Mayank, that if you know about the true Hinduism, you cannot but be of an eclectic vision in life. I mean, a religion one of whose
Absolutely.
founding dictums is Ekam Satya Vipraha Bahuda Vatanti. The truth is one, wise people call it by different names. A religion which treasures the Mahavakya, Ano Bhadraha Kritavo Yantu Vishvata. Let good thoughts flow from all directions. A religion which emphasizes the fact that Udara Charitanam Vasudhaiva Kutumbakum. For the big hearted, the entire world is a family. For such a religion
Absolutely.
and for its legatees, they are far too self assured in their achievements. Not that this civilization has been without its blemishes. And I especially point out to the caste system and the tremendous discrimination, inequality, exploitation, and oppression that it has sanctioned over centuries. And I also talk about gender
Right.
disparity and the general subjugation of women in some aspects of the worldview of Hinduism, particularly after a certain period. But that apart, if you take the civilization in its entirety, it's far too self assured in its continuity, its Sanatan nature, to be afraid of diversity of thought. And I think, therefore,
Right.
Hindus, if they don't know about this civilization, don't know about the animating philosophy behind it, they are likely to become cannon fodder in the hands of the ignorant who assume to interpret it today wrongly, but
Absolutely.
with a sense of
Yeah.
Talibani confidence and fiat of converting Hinduism into a Wahhabi faith, which it is not. In fact, it has survived precisely because it is not, but it is. It's conquering eclecticism which has made Hinduism Sanatan.
Right. You seem genuinely worried that given this general apathy among Hindus to know about their glorious history, is setting itself up for some Western Indologists to question even the very foundation of a Hindu civilization. Would you care to elaborate on that?
You see, uh, there is a sense of seeing Hinduism superficially. And when I speak of Hindu civilization, there was first opposition to the word Hindu. People said there is no such word as
Right.
Hindu. I provide arguments to show that Hindu or Indu or Ind was a word recognized much before Christ, and all the people south of the Himalayas were known as such. Then there was the question that if it is Hinduism, if there is such a word as Hindu, is there a civilization attached to it, or is it all happenstance? As people say, that it
Right.
was just the crossroads of history, one empire after another, without the application of mind that goes into building a civilizational entity. Then I question that. Then, if they accept a civilization, some of these critics say that why do you say it's Hindu? It was also Buddhist. It, in fact, predominantly Buddhist, and for one millennia we were Buddhist, forgetting the fact that Buddhism is a great religion, but it's an offshoot of Hinduism, and trying to forge a great distinction between them as two separate religions without seeing the obvious overlaps and commonalities, where Buddhism, as an
Right.
offshoot of Hinduism, evolved on its own, is a very mischievous agenda. Then they say there is no
Right.
such. Can we call Hinduism in the singular? I mean, Wendy Doniger says that it's a cross between a tortoise and a hedgehog, of all things, because they cannot get over their what has been called their anxiety chaos, because Hinduism nurtures within
Right.
itself the diversity without you losing sight of its centralizing unitary force. But for
Right.
those accustomed to Abrahamic faiths and for the certainties that go with it, Hinduism presented to them superficially a hydra headed monsters with 3 crore gods and deities without understanding that underlying all of that is the remarkable balance between Nirgun and Shagun. Nirgun, the ultimate Brahm, Adrisht, Achintya,
Right.
Nirguna, Nirvisheshin Matram, undifferentiated consciousness, Sarva Pratyay Darshan, and supreme intelligence pervading the cosmos. And we are but emanations of it, and so there is an ultimate unity to this bewildering cosmos. And that the manifest deity is but an representation of that. And so, if you are assured in the Nirgun nature of this unifying cosmos, then you can let your imagination run riot in the creation of Sagun deities without diluting that first
Absolutely.
principle. So,
Right.
whether
Right.
it's Wendy Doniger or in some cases with respect to Sanskrit in particular, some other Indologists, I think there is a tendency to try and see make Hinduism fit into more understandable categories of the Western mind. Whereas Hinduism is sui generic, it is essentially beyond such
Right.
categories.
Right. You write about Megasthenes, who came in the fourth century before current era, and he spoke in terms of Hindu being the entire area that we are talking about. Why do you think then, despite it being referred to so early in our civilization, people still continue to wonder whether it can be called the unified, harmonized civilization that you've been talking about?
No, I think that It stems from a reluctance to accept Hinduism's civilizational credentials, which would make it rank among the great civilizations of the world. That same conundrum applies when we go back to the antiquity of Hinduism. And people will even
Yes.
buy the by now completely outdated and rejected theory of Aryan invasion, tracing it to only 1500 BCE, when all the mass of scientific evidence
Right.
predates it by at least a millennia before, which places it in the category of the great founding civilizations of the world. Now, why do they have this reluctance? I don't understand. Perhaps because Hindus themselves have not self consciously made the claim of being a great civilization, like Mesopotamia, like Egypt, like China, like Persia. I think Hindus take their religion, their civilization for granted in many ways. And I'm not talking of
Right.
xenophobia or chauvinism, but I think it's time that we spent a little time thinking about these things. It's important, in my view, for Hindus themselves, but for the world as a whole.
Right. Would you then argue that the self assurance that you talked about earlier is, in a sense, its own undoing at this stage of life?
Sorry, come again. I'm so sorry I missed your question.
No, I was saying the idea that this level of self assurance exists within the Hindu civilization, this cosmic worldview, in a sense, are undoing of the kind of argument that you're making that Hindus should claim it's their civilization's greatness.
Yeah, I think essentially, Mayank, it's a lack of sufficient knowledge. You know, if you don't
Right.
know, you are less curious to know, you don't explore. And
Right.
it leads to two developments. One is the devaluation of the past. If you don't know, you don't want to know, then it's not self assurance as much as it is being a participant in a general amnesia about the past. And sometimes this a second offshoot is that the less you know, the more brittle you become in glorifying the past. So I think, and then it leads to the consequence of the existence of people like Dinath Batra, who believed that there were aeroplanes and computers and televisions in the past, which trivializes history. So I need to go beyond the lack of knowledge and the inexplicable trivialization of history to the genuine substance of the facts and leave the viewer or the reader, sorry, to make their own assessments. I try and give some of the facts on a
True.
very wide canvas.
Don't you think?
And sorry.
Right. Don't you think one of the reasons behind the reluctance or aversion to calling the ancient India as a broadly collective entity stems from the fact that it appeared to coalesce around cultural, spiritual axis rather than a religious one?
Well, I don't believe that beyond a point you can separate religion and culture. Certainly, you can't separate spirituality and culture. In fact, Bharat in the Natya Shastra says that the moment of ideal perception of beauty is akin to the experience of Brahm Anubhav, which is an ultimate spiritual entity. So,
Right. Right.
certainly, much of our culture has religious origins, but not of an exclusionist nature. Some of our best temples, our best poetry, the entire bhakti movement
Right.
for 600 years, the remarkable efflorescence of literary expression in all languages, the democratization of Hindu civilization, the
Right.
amazing agility by which Hinduism survived the Islamic onslaught of a proselytizing, violent invasion. All of this very often stems from the connection to religion, the sculptures, the temples, even our music and dance. They are devoted to some of our deities. And the animating principle is that of a spiritual evolution. So that in the final act of Bharatnatyam, you are closest to that supreme reality as possible through the expression of dance. The same thing with music, when it reaches the
Right.
crescendo, you are supposed to have transcended the limitations of the mind. You are supposed to have transcended the buddhi, the ego, the ahankar, and moved on to the sakshi within you, to that quietude, peace,
Right.
solace, calm, bliss that is within you, to experience that perfect moment of congruence between art and spirituality. So I really can't separate
Right.
in Hindu context religion and culture. Even in
Okay.
architecture, Mayank, the
One of
architect
the
is called an avatar
yeah,
of Brahma.
right, right. One striking expression that you use while talking about many defining features of Hinduism is the grandeur of thought. In terms of, I mean, I would personally cite someone like, say, Bhartrhari and Vairagya Shatakam. You're talking about someone who lived 1500 years ago, uh, who who held for. I mean, he's regarded as one of the world's most preeminent grammarians, even in Western scholarship, if that's what convinces a lot of people. My point is, despite having such remarkable background to it, why do you think it is lending itself to this rather crass and vicious weaponization that we see now?
Well, in the field of grammar, Mayank, Panini's Ashtadhyayi remains still one of the world's
Right,
most complete grammatic lexicons. And
right,
Patanjali's commentary several centuries later on it, the Mahabhashya. And then Bhartrhari's Vakyapadiya. Uh, they show the remarkable, why I say grandeur of thought, and I'll come to the latter part of your question in a moment. The grandeur of thought is because behind every concept, there is tremendous cerebral energy, tremendous application of mind. For instance, take the Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Hinduism or Hindu civilization does not opt for the easy path of prescribing 10 commandments. There are no 10 commandments. It indicates certain virtues that should be pursued, and it leaves the final judgment on whether an action is good or bad on other aspects, including the contextual circumstances. For instance, an absolutely starving man taking an apple from a rich man's orchard is at one level committing a theft, at another level is fighting for his life, right to life. Is it a sin or is it a not?
right,
Now, Hinduism will revel in these moral dilemmas rather than prescribing an absolute set of do's or don'ts. So it shows the great
right.
celebration behind so many of these concepts that it really left me staggered. It left me staggered. I mean, the first six systems of Hindu philosophy can almost be called in their entirety atheist, because they are not speaking about God and divinity in a conventional sense. They are talking about what could
Right.
be the ultimate cause behind the bewildering plurality of this cosmos. So I'm just giving you random examples. There are hundreds more I could quote and you know about. Now,
Sure.
why do we see your latter part of your question was we see a certain distortion of Hinduism today. And that is because I believe Hinduism has got hijacked by a lumpen element that whose evangelism is in inverse proportion to their knowledge either of the civilization or Hinduism. And that
Right.
leads to brittleness, a propensity to violence, a propensity to exclusion, an aversion to dialogue and discussion. One of the great contributions of Hindu civilization, the Shastrarth, where a discussion takes place between Adi Shankaracharya and Mandan Mishra, opposed in their points of view. So it is its lack of knowledge, its aversion to dialogue and discussion, its propensity towards violence and exclusion, its leaning towards chauvinism, which is usually cultural illiteracy. Uh, all of these, its aggression, its propensity also to take the law into its own hands, uh, all of this, and its infinite ability to ignore some of the real challenges by within Hinduism, like reform of Hinduism, which all its great thinkers spoke about, including of the caste system and gender disparity. Now, all of this tends to distort Hinduism, and as I say in my book, it's a sacrilege to make Hinduism
Right.
approximate a Talibani faith or to make something like Wahhabi Hinduism. It's sacrilege because that is not the nature of Hinduism.
You've written about at some length about the lack of moral absolutism. In fact, you say Hindu society, they argue, was tainted by the absence of an ironclad moral framework. This is something that Western societies are very focused on. Absolutely ironclad idea of what is right and what is wrong. While in Hinduism, there is such a wide spectrum, people get confused. In fact, I often cite examples even of Hindi movies, for instance. There was a movie called Mary Jung, written by, I'm sorry, I'm going at some length
No, no.
to illustrate how much it has percolated down this thinking. In that, there is a scene where Amrish Puri tells Anil Kapoor he's supposed to kill someone on Amrish Puri's behalf. And Anil Kapoor argues that उन्होंने मेरी जान बचाई थी मैं उनको कैसे मार सकता हूँ अमरीश पुरी's counter is उसने तुम्हारी जान बचाई वो अपनी जगह है अब तुमको उसकी जान लेनी है वो अपनी जगह है now it's a pretty stark form of moral absolutism that a lot of Westerners cannot come to terms with. Do you think that's a problem within Hinduism?
I don't think so because Hinduism is so pragmatic. The problem with absolute don'ts is that half the time, if not the majority of times, we are dealing with man made laws. By man made
Right.
laws, that in some areas the custom is you can have four wives. In others, it's a sin to have more than one. In some you can drink, in some you can't. In some there is celibacy, in some in the priesthood, in others there is not. The definitions of right and wrong when they are man-made laws or human being made laws vary so much that to say that this is what is absolutely right and what is wrong is I believe uh, interventionist beyond a sustainable point. However, and this is
Right.
important, Hinduism does say that certain virtues contribute towards the cessation of the agitations of the mind, while others increase it. Remember, the ultimate goal
Right.
is to become part of that one great reality, Aham Brahmasmi, where we become one with that Supreme, which incidentally has no moral categories at all. Neti, neti, not this, not this. So, if that
Right.
is the goal, greed, avarice, envy, anger lead to agitation of mind, whereas compassion, kindness, truthfulness, these contribute to uh, stilling of the mind ultimately. So, Hinduism does
Right.
prescribe certain virtues, but it hesitates from laying down an absolute law. Given the number of man made laws which differ anyway, and given, as I explained earlier to you in passing, the contextual nature of many acts committed, and I gave the example of that theft of the apple from the
Right.
rich man's orchard. But for instance, when there are no absolute sinners in Hinduism, not absolute sinners. Even Ravan in the
Right.
Ramayana, when he dies, the heavens rain down flowers on him. He's a great worshipper of Shiva. When Duryodhan dies, the gods themselves praise him for having been a great Yodha, a warrior who fought for what he thought was right, even if he may have been wrong in thinking of what he thought was right. Similarly, when the five Pandavas reach heaven, or at least Yudhishthir does, he's surprised to find that all his brothers and Draupadi are in Narak or hell. Now, these
Right.
are Hinduism's way of pointing out the relativity of absolute truth in a human circumstance. And it requires, as I have
Right.
said before, audacity of thought, great courage, even of moral conviction to be able to say this and to maintain it. That is why dharma, or the notion of right and wrong as defined in Hinduism, is a fascinating subject.
It is. Yeah. To wrap up the last question, I've hurried through it, but so far so good. The last one is, how are we to retrieve this grand civilizational legacy from the idea of Hindutva?
I think that we must understand that knowledge is the biggest antidote. When you know more about Hinduism, you know more about its strengths, its tensile resilience, the reasons for its survival, its animating philosophy, its sense of inclusion, its remarkable nuanced nature and sophisticated nature of thought, its cerebral foundations. I think you then can better deal with those who, with minimum knowledge, assert absolute truths. And therefore, knowledge is something which I strongly emphasize in my book. I believe it should be done by personal effort, but also by important changes in the educational curriculum, which should come about in due course of
Right.
time. Particular governments may or may not want them to come about, but they should. But there is a deep reason why Hindus should know more about their civilization and its philosophy. There's a deep reason, which is precisely to counter such forces. So I believe that reform within Hinduism, which takes away some of the great caste inequalities from it and the oppression and exploitation that goes with it. I believe that the gender disparity, where a group of men, usually upper caste, presume to tell women what to wear, how to behave, what to eat, what to drink, and decide on who they are as if they are appendages of the male species, uh, and harangue boys and girls sitting in parks. I believe once you know how originally Hinduism gave respect to women, how Gargi could stand up in an assembly of men and argue with sage Yagnavalkya, how Draupadi even in mythology, and I don't mean mythology in any pejorative sense, as part of the great narrative of the
Right.
Mahabharata, how she could stand up and ask Yudhishthira, did you lose yourself first or me? And if you lost yourself, what right did you have to put me on stake? So on and so forth. If we know about this and know about how the distortions crept in, and that if we know, for instance, very importantly, Mayank, the remarkable balance that Hindu civilization achieves between the sacred and the profane, how we give within the four
Right.
purusharths dharma, artha, kama, moksha, where even the physical can be a window to the divine when pursued in conjunction, as Vatsyayan says in the Kama Sutra. When dharma, arth, and kam are pursued in proportion and none in exclusion as part of a balanced life, they lead automatically to the last, which is moksha. If we know
True.
these things, that can be an antidote to what the Hindutva politics. So, therefore, I have said in my books, we don't need Hindutva, we need Hindu Satya.
Right. On that grand note, Mr. Verma, I want to thank you very much for your time. I'm sorry about the earlier technical problems. I had to rush
No,
through, but I think I pretty much covered what I was looking for.
thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much. It
you.
was a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise, it always is. You're always compelling. So, no surprise there.
Thank you so much.